This session is about foreign direct investment, and we have an outstanding keynote speaker, Mr. Shaktikanta Das. We share the same surname, but we are not related. And we actually come from neighboring states of India, both in the eastern part of the country. In the administration, if I can use an American terminology, that is our government, we have some amazing people leading policy making and implementing government decisions. And in the economic policy space, the Economic Affairs Group of the Ministry of Finance is central to everything that happens in our economy. And to use now corporate terminology, the chief executive of that group, the Economic Affairs Group, is Mr. Shaktikanta Das, who works literally as the right hand of the Minister of Finance. Today, of course, is Minister of Finance and Defense. Mr. Das comes from the East, but he served for many, many years in the South. That is our system. You don't know where you're going to be and where you'll be allocated. And he was allocated to the state of Tamil Nadu, which has been one of our best administered states. And he has risen from level to level, and he's come here to the position of economic affairs after many years of service in the administration. There's one image of him which I want to mention. On the 8th of November, 2016, not so long ago, the Prime Minister addressed the nation and announced demonetization. And soon after that, on television, we had two people dealing with the media, responding to a variety of questions. One was the Governor of the Reserve Bank of India, and the other was our keynote speaker here, Mr. Shaktikanta Das. And his clarity and his quiet communication and confidence gave a lot of good feeling and good vibes around the country. So we are delighted to have you here, and I'm glad that with you we have two distinguished participants, one from Japan and one from the US. We gave the US panelist a hard time yesterday at the US session, but he survived, as I can see, Clyde. But before we go further, may I ask you to make some opening remarks, Mr. Das, and then we will move on to the panelists. Would you like to say something about the subject of FDI, government's policies, and how we have moved from the old days where really we depended on domestic resources for development and growth to the scenario where we have been reaching out to FDI. We've been liberalizing FDI to the extent even defense, I think a sensitive area is 100% FDI is allowed. So please take the floor. Mr. Das.
Well, thank you, Mr. Tarun Das, for such kind words. Distinguished guests on the dais, ladies and gentlemen, participants in this two-day event. I had occasion to go through the program which you had over the 2 days, yesterday and today, and I think the discussions have been very, very fruitful and worthwhile. Yesterday we had some leading ministers from Government of India who are handling various aspects of economic administration and infrastructure sector. So I'm sure you had a lot of lively and useful discussion. So far as this session is concerned, the focus is on FDI. I'll make some brief opening remarks, and then perhaps we can go for, I would be very happy to hear the other participants who are part of the panel, and also then after that we can go for some questions and answers. FDI has come to play an important role so far as the investment landscape of India is concerned. Once in 1991, once the delicensing of industries was done, which I would personally consider as the biggest reform which took place in 1991, and that was something which happened, I think, 1 or 2 days ahead of the budget that year. The host of industries which earlier required licenses, how much you could produce, where you would locate your factory, all those things were done away with, and industries, various groups of industries, excepting a few, were delicensed. That was the beginning of the foreign direct investment regime for India. We have moved a long distance over the last 26, 27 years. And the movement has been very fast in the last 2 years. Starting with November 2015, when the government introduced the the biggest dose of reforms in FDI, followed by another set of reforms in March of in February last year as a part of the budget, then subsequently in March, again in June, and thereafter a lot of measures have been taken. And with all this liberalization which have been undertaken in FDI today, we are today one of the most open economies. India is today one of the most open economies so far as FDI policy is concerned. There are very few countries where even in domestic civil aviation sector, FDI is allowed 100%. India, we have allowed that. So there are various other sectors where it has been opened up, and today there are, and most of it, what is even more important is that apart from opening up, I think most of it has also been put on the automatic route. You don't need an approval from the government for coming and making investment under most of the sectors. So as a result, what happened was that the role of the FIPB, the Foreign Investment Promotion Board, which was tasked with the responsibility of giving government approval wherever approvals were required, the number of applications before the FIPB also started dwindling. In fact, that was the whole approach, to try and put as many sectors, as many subsectors as possible in the automatic route, and only minimum sectors, minimum number of sectors which require some approval today, they go to the FIPB. And that would include broadly certain aspects of telecom. Then you have the defense beyond 49%. These require certain security clearances, and therefore there are a few other aspects also which need to be looked at. There are some licensing requirements in defense, so therefore that required to go before the FIPB. And government has moved ahead even further by announcing the abolition of the FIPB. So therefore, if you compare on a global scale, it's the number of sectors and subsectors which have been opened up, number one. Number two, the automatic process which has been put in place. In most of the other developed countries, incidentally, there are mechanisms, and almost many of the foreign investments do require some form of approval or the other. But we have put most of the things on the automatic route. That also demonstrates the kind of confidence today India has about its domestic financial resilience and the strength of Indian capital markets, the strength of the Indian rupee, and the strength of the money markets. Investments do come in the automatic process and without requiring any approval. And the third step which government has taken is that even the process of approval is also being simplified further by dismantling the FIPB and delegating the powers to to various ministries or the regulators as the case may be. And the necessary formal, the proposals will be considered by the government very shortly, and the roadmap, the regime, that is the procedure which will be followed after dismantling of FIPP, that will be announced in a matter of weeks. FDI in the last 2 years have also become much more important because there was a perceived feeling that the domestic investment sentiment was weak, and perhaps domestic investments were not taking place. While there is a considerable amount of truth in that kind of conclusion, but it is not entirely correct. It's true that the banks were hit by the problem of non-performing assets. It is true that many large corporate houses were hit by stressed assets, were hit by balance sheet problems, sectors, that is corporates which were in sectors, especially the commodity related sectors, steel, aluminum, etc. The infrastructure sector in highways and power sector. Many big corporate houses were having their own balance sheet problems, so they were therefore not in a position to invest more. They had to necessarily clean up their balance sheet and consolidate before they could think of more investments. So while the banks had the problem of stressed assets, large corporate houses had problems of their own stressed balance sheet, what we call the twin balance sheet problem. In that environment, it is correct that the bigger corporate houses were not in a position to invest. But if you look at the kind of investment which has been taking place in India over the last 2 to 3 years, through private equity funds route, through the angel funds route, the investments which are which were happening through the instrumentality of the startups, the investments which were happening in other segments like e-commerce and several other segments of the software sector. There was a huge amount of investment which was taking place, and consequential employment was also being generated. So therefore, while it is true that some investments from large corporate houses were not taking place, at the same time, very silently, a lot of other investments were taking place. If you look at the investments made by the unlisted companies, for example, that was also significant over the last 2 to 3 years. So therefore, we have a situation where domestic investments, there are certain problems, but domestic investment is taking place. And so far as the problems which have affected these large corporate houses, government on its part has taken whatever steps were necessary. For example, for the steel sector, government has, initially we worked on a safeguard duty. Then there was this minimum import price. In textile sector, government has come out with a package of policy incentives for the players in that segment. For the leather and footwear sector also, this year in the budget speech, the finance minister has announced that government will be coming out with a package. For the highways and the power sector, the infrastructure sector particularly, where the corporates were affected, in the highway sector, government has come out with new instrumentalities of resolving the various PPP projects which were stuck halfway by infusing additional capital, by introducing new models of PPP, by allowing replacement of promoters. Power sector also, most of the problem which related to the distribution companies, government has come out with the Udaya scheme, whereby the liabilities of the distribution companies have been taken over by the respective state governments through issuance of what we call the Udaya bonds. So therefore, if you look at the overall, scenario, what I'm trying to say is that there is, so far as domestic investment is concerned, large corporate houses were facing problems. Government has taken the necessary measures to debottleneck and to remove the various difficulties which they were encountering. Parallelly, in the domestic segment also, domestic investment segment also, lot of investment was taking place by unlisted companies through, through the private equity route, through angel fund route, through the startup route. And on top of that, FDI has come to play a very important role. As pointed out by the finance minister in his budget speech, in the first half of the current financial year, our FDI, India's FDI inflow grew by about 35–36%, when world over the FDI inflows had declined by 5%. So therefore, India was an exception, and FDI inflows have mattered a lot. The other aspect which I want to mention, apart from the fact that we have facilitated and we have tried to create an enabling environment for all the FDI to come and, for all the money which is coming in through FDI route to come and, get invested here. The other effort that has been taken by the government is to ensure that at the field level also, the states where actually the projects are implemented, the states are also entirely on board. And therefore, we have now initiated a process of, ranking the states in the matter of ease of doing business, which has generated a healthy competition among the states. And many of the states, or I would say most of the states today, have created their own land banks and have got over the problems of the difficulties in land acquisition by carrying out state-level amendments in the land acquisition laws. Availability of land has not been a problem for setting up any industry in India. The other aspect on which we are also very keen and we are focusing a lot is that through the FDI and through the domestic investment also, we are in a position to create quality jobs. I think we need to also create quality jobs, for which the government has given considerable amount of, in fact, great amount of emphasis on the Skill India mission, and that program is today very much in operation, and the Skill India mission to enhance the skills of the people who are already doing blue-collar jobs, or the youngsters who are waiting in the wings for getting new jobs. The Skill India mission has been positioned. And at the same time, while liberalizing almost every policy, while liberalizing every aspect of the FDI policy, we have also kept in mind the requirements of job creation and the requirements of quality job creation. Both have been kept in mind. So therefore, the government has a very constructive approach so far as FDI is concerned. And ultimately, it is the FDI and the domestic investment together which can change the economic landscape of the country. Recently, the OECD has released its economic survey of India, and with regard to many aspects of especially with regard to the aspect of structural reforms, and with regard to the kind of domestic restrictions which are in operation with regard to functioning of businesses, the OECD has done a ranking of countries, and in that India is ranked at the highest. So therefore, this is all the result of kind of liberalization and structural reform measures which the government has undertaken. I would like to stop here and leave it to the other members of the panelists to give their observations. To conclude, I just want to mention that investment, domestic as well as FDI, is very important. The government continues to remain committed to push through the reform agenda and liberalize the processes both for domestic and for foreign investment to take place in India. The requirement of job creation and quality job creation is the, one of the focal points in the investment policy decisions of the government. And for all this to play their role, the government remains committed to provide an overall macroeconomic and a fiscal environment which is prudent and which is strong. Our macroeconomic fundamentals, as you would know, is very strong. The overall fiscal also remains very strong, and the policies adopted are very prudent. And in the coming year, we are at the end of 2016-17. I think in the coming year, in 17-18, one would expect a lot of investments to come into India, both from domestic as well as from foreign sources. I was recently, last week, on last Friday and Saturday, I was in Germany, in Baden-Baden, where the meeting of the G20 finance ministers was taking place. And our interaction with the participants from various countries showed that today the world is looking more confident, because the IMF has projected better growth rate for the world, both in 2017 and 2018. And the world also, the global community also looks very optimistic so far as India is concerned. And the global community has a sense of satisfaction and assurance that India will continue. India is carrying out the right policy reform measures, and India will continue with the reform measures. So I'll stop here and wait for further QA. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Das. I'm going to turn to the panel now, and I'm going to start with AKAHOSHI-san, President of JETRO. Now, there is no country which is closer to our Prime Minister's initiatives for reaching out for investment, for partnership than Japan. In September 2014, soon after he became Prime Minister, he went to Japan, and the personal chemistry between Abe-san and Prime Minister Modi is quite amazing. And I think it has led to many initiatives between Japan and India, including the first bullet train to happen in India. AKAHOSHI-san, you've heard Mr. Das. We know that Japan is a very strong partner of India. How do you view our FDI policies and our processes? Do you have any concerns? Do you have any questions to Mr. Das?
Thank you very much, Mr. Das, both Mr. Das for the kind introduction as well as the interesting remarks. And before referring to Secretary Das' remarks, let me begin with my recent experience. I participated at the Vibrant Gujarat, which was held in January, and JETRO's other government organizations, which mission is to promote trade and investment between Japan and foreign countries. We had organized big Japan pavilions, and we also conducted Japan seminars, and a lot of Japanese companies who are active here attended to the event, and we discussed there how we achieve literally win-win situations and what lay ahead. And there, I really felt that FDI into India is beneficial for both sides. So that is number one. And yes, Japan has made a lot of investment to developing countries in Asia, as well as developed countries like US or Europe. And I would say we have grown with those economies. So in that sense, we have been typical capital export countries. And it's quite typical or rather extreme. According to the UNCTAD statistics, usually we are inclined to think that developed countries provide capital and developing countries is arrested, but it's not true. According to the UNCTAD statistics, for developing countries, when we compare the inward investment and outward investment, inward is 0.74 outward. Yes, and for developed countries, outward is more than inward, but the ratio is 1.2. But for Japan's case, for several reasons, this number is quite extreme. It's 7 times. So we are really typical capital export country so far. But having said that, I'd like to touch on another aspect of Japan as a recipient of FDI. And it's needed to say that FDI is not just a capital movement or setting up the new facility for manufacturing, but what should be highlighted is that FDI is accompanied by technology transfer, and it will raise total factor productivities, or TFE, in recipient countries. So various ways include so-called spillover effect. I wouldn't say Japan is a kind of simple technology transfer, but we like to keep up with momentum of innovations all over the world. And so in that sense, we like to invite more foreign technologies and business models. And when I say foreign also indicates something different. And there are a lot of definitions of innovation, but most prevailing and famous one is by Dr. Schumpeter's. It's a new combination, combined different things. And it will bring about something new. And I believe Japan still has own strengths, but accepting or inviting different ideas. We think we should change, and we can change, not only individual company basis, but also our society or our way of thinking. So now I would like to present 2 case studies relating to Japan. First one is regulatory reform. To increase FDIs, definitely we need regulatory reform or other reform. And this is a kind of comments to what Secretary does described. Thanks to the strong economic commitment of incumbent Modi administrations, it has brought about a lot of increase of FDI in these countries. And let me turn to Japan's case. First case is Japan's medical field. Japan, as you may know, was fast aging society. So our medical cost as a country has been surging. So how should we deal with these issues? The first one is we introduced the fastest drug approval system. And the second one is natural. We have encouraged use of generic. By those measures, a lot of foreign pharmaceutical firms, of course including Indians, have made an investment in Japan or get alliance with good Japanese pharmaceutical companies. And the second case study is Uber. I learned after I came here, there is something similar service in this country as well. But Uber launched their service in Japan last year. And very recently, actually last month, the base taxi fare in Tokyo has been reduced from 700 yen for first 2 kilometers to 400 yen to first 1 kilometers. And if this reduction, by the way, taxi fare is under regulation in our countries, like others. And if this change has been caused by the Uber, it's quite simple and interesting story. But it's not true. Because Uber so far has been accepted or introduced in limited area, so not in Tokyo. So very superficial reason to introduce this change was to create new demand for very short distance service. But nevertheless, I think I would say it indicates a lot of possibilities for futures. There should be a lot of talking points, like penetrating ride-share service or increasing necessity of introducing IT technologies in that industries. So I think we will be able to see a new industry in the near futures. And in concluding, I would like to touch upon a different point. In previous session, in the morning sessions, I argued that Japan and India can complement each other. And what we have in mind is that we like to complete, or we like, at least we have to catch up the trend of the so-called the fourth industrial revolution, or whatever it is called, technology like IoTs, robotics, AI, big data. But in order to do that, we have to be excellent, both in hardware and software. And Japan has had an advantage in manufacturing hardware, but not so much in software. And obviously, India has a strength in software. So through various ways, including foreign direct investment or collaborations, I think Japan and India can cooperate for the future industries, industrial structure of the world. I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, AKAHOSHI-san. Clyde, over to you on initial remarks on FDI and how to get it right.
Okay, you getting me? Good, thank you. Okay. So clearly FDI has been and will be an important part of development in India and other rapidly developing parts of the world. I have been involved in this from different directions, but I think that the two world champions, maybe the three world champions of FDI are Singapore, Ireland, and China. The Singapore and Ireland models are very similar. They're small countries. They don't have big domestic demand. And so there's not really a good reason for foreign companies to go invest there. So they create reasons. And they do that by offering free land for factories or facilities, offering tax holidays for 10, 15, or in some cases 25 years, by taking care of the development of the infrastructure required for a particular facility, or by training the workforce. So in effect, they subsidize the investment. And that subsidy is very important and has very interesting effects. I, for many years, was on the board of a leading American semiconductor producer. And there came a point when a decision had to be made whether to put a facility in another country. Now, according to the economics that we've all studied, according to international economic theory, trade is driven by comparative advantage. And the country that has a relatively lower cost or higher productivity will make product A, and another country has a relatively higher productivity for product C, so they trade. So, but what we found was that in semiconductors, actually the United States was, in terms of operating costs, the United States was the low-cost producer, the high productivity producer, and the high-quality producer. So all the logic of international economics would argue that that semiconductor factory should stay in the U.S. And the U.S. should export semiconductors and use them to trade for other products. But the country that we were thinking about did two things. One thing it did was that it hinted that if we didn't put a factory there, unpleasant things could happen in our market in that country. But secondly, that country's officials said, how much does a factory cost? $8 billion. And they said, well, we could give you the land free. We could, no taxes for 15 years, utilities at half cost, train the labor force, put in the infrastructure, and we could make a $1 billion capital grant. So once you factored in the cost of capital with all of those effective subsidies, the total cost actually became less to put it in that country than in the US. So that's what we did. Now, I would say Singapore and Ireland are fantastic at finding potential targets that they want to attract to produce within their borders. In the case of Ireland, for example, at one point, Intel, the US chip maker, was considering whether or not to put a factory in Ireland. And there was a question about whether there were enough engineers, enough electrical engineers in Ireland to satisfactorily staff the facility. And the Irish government, through the Irish university system, identified all of the electrical engineering graduates from Irish universities or from foreign universities over the past 25 years and contacted all of them. Some of them were living in Australia, some of them were in the US, some of them in other places in Europe, but the Irish government contacted all of them and suggested how wonderful it would be if they returned to Ireland to work at this new Intel facility. And in fact, many of them did, and the facility went to Ireland. So that's the carrot approach, and as I mentioned, that can be combined with a stick approach. The stick approach works particularly well in a big country, let's say like China. The early investments in China from abroad certainly were risky. They were not the safest investments, but China is a big market. And so for a big market, a company is prepared to take more risk. And if that risk is reduced a bit with benefits and subsidies, the more the better, the more the merrier. Now, having kind of looked at how this world of foreign direct investment actually works, I have to say I think that there are some problems and that it may well change in the future. One problem is that if you're not a big country, India is a big country, if you're not a big country, it's very hard to compete with the offers that are being made by countries like Ireland or Singapore. Second problem is that essentially these are investment subsidies. And a question is, are they really legal under World Trade Organization rules? They haven't been challenged in the WTO yet, but I suspect they will be. Under WTO rules, we of course declare illegal any kind of export subsidy or any kind of direct subsidy. And so, but the question then is, well, if I can change by dint of financial subsidies, if I can change the comparative advantage of a semiconductor factory, isn't that, in effect, a trade subsidy? So I think that that is going to become a bigger and bigger question in the international trade negotiations. Secondly, I think that countries like the United States might begin to become more aggressive themselves. At the moment, the U.S. doesn't have any kind of well, we have a small program, but the U.S. is not a sophisticated national player in using inducements for foreign investment. Each of the U.S. states has their own program. Some of the states are pretty good. Some of the states have offices in Tokyo or other major capitals. Some of the states are bad. But a state like South Carolina, Tennessee, they're pretty sophisticated. But in this game of financial incentives, the states only have limited resources. They can offer you some benefits, some tax benefits, but they don't control federal taxation. They don't control income taxes. And they don't control many of the regulations that go along with investment. So I would rank the United States at very near the bottom among countries in terms of attracting programs to attract FDI. But I think that's going to change. I think the U.S. will begin to try to offset the financial inducements that are being offered by Singapore, Ireland, and China, and others. And then I guess the final point I'd like to make is that FDI has been very closely related to the development of global supply chains. But two things are happening to the global supply chain. One of them is that a lot of the global supply chain is increasingly being absorbed into China. So in the past, for example, let's go back to semiconductors, a semiconductor chip would be fabricated, let's say, in Silicon Valley and flown to Singapore, where it would be tested, the circuits would be tested, and it would be packaged. And then it would be flown to China, where it would be assembled into a final product. But increasingly, the fabrication of the chip is taking place in China, as is the testing and the packaging and the assembly. So increasingly, there's not a supply chain in the semiconductor industry. And I think that that same phenomenon exists in a number of other industries. Beyond that is the fact that because of three-dimensional manufacturing and other advances in manufacturing technology, it's increasingly less expensive, more effective to produce where the product is sold rather than producing at some distant location and shipping. And so for all those reasons, I think the world of foreign direct investment is going to change dramatically over the next 10 years. But I think that India is in a very good position and has a lot of leverage if it uses it wisely. Thank you.
Thank you, Clyde. Thank you very much. Let me put the first question to Mr. Das. You referred in your remarks to the announcement about the abolition of the Foreign Investment Promotion Board. Now, the foreign investors have been living with the board for 26 years, since 1991, when actually the secretariat used to be in the Prime Minister's office, and then it has been between Finance Ministry and Industry Ministry. The expectation now, what I hear from foreign investors is that what happens, and you have not yet, obviously you all are working at it, and you are trying to put flesh on whatever new system will be there. But the expectation is that whatever comes will be better than the FIPB, will be simpler. And you've talked very much about the automatic route and how much liberalization. Because this is a forum today where, you know, there are a number of international participants, if there's anything without, you know, which you can share on your thoughts about where are we going down the road from the FIPB?
You are absolutely right that initially the FIPB was a part of the Prime Minister's office, then it moved to the Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion, and then it came to the Finance Ministry, to the Department of Economic Affairs. Over the last 2 years, our interface with the investors or their representatives is entirely online. We have sort of discouraged the need for representatives of companies or investors. We have discouraged them from visiting the North Block to give their application or to seek clarifications or to try and meet officials, because we, you know, in the interest of promoting greater transparency and speed, we have made the entire process of interaction with the investors, with the FDI applicants online. The applications are filed online. If we have any questions or queries, they are also sent online. The replies are received online. All interministerial consultations that we do, that is also done through a portal to which we have access only given to the concerned ministries. So we have promoted a lot of transparency, speed, and you know, ease of navigating in government. You don't have to come and meet a joint secretary or a director in the finance ministry to push your proposals. In fact, we have consciously discouraged that. Now that arrangement will continue. Naturally, when we move to a post-FIPB situation, that arrangement will continue. The portal which we have created, the entire mechanism which we have created, that will continue. Who is going to control it and how it is going to be done, that will be spelled out when, you know, once the government takes a final decision. So first thing I want to mention is that the online interface with the government for clearances, that will continue. Now, the second thing which we have done is that the applications will come in, then they will get examined, and internally wherever comments or other, you know, observations of other ministries are required in limited number of cases, or wherever security clearance is concerned, that also will be obtained. There is a mechanism which has been worked out. In fact, we had formed a group of officers from the Department of Economic Affairs, from the Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion, from Ministry of External Affairs, and it had officers from the representatives from the Reserve Bank of India and various other ministries. There was an internal group which had been constituted. They have finalized the detailed modalities about the successor arrangement. That is very much in place. We have also held consultations with some leading legal firms and consulting firms particularly, and legal firms which pilot a lot of which sort of bring in a lot of applications, or which play an advisory role to foreign direct investors. That is, who sort of assist the foreign direct investors with regard to filing of applications and to sort of do the entire processing. We have had consultations with them also. So the stakeholder consultation has been done. So I can assure you that post FIPB, the arrangement that we are going to have will be much simpler. FIPB itself had become very, very simple. This is even going to be simpler.
Thank you very much. That's great news. In your remarks, you also referred to the area of the fiscal management, and you talked about the consolidation and the discipline that has been brought into the fiscal situation. And that always encourages foreign investors, because they like to see that the country is managing its fiscal situation well. You had set up a committee on fiscal responsibility and management. And according to the media reports, that report of that committee was also submitted to the government. So is that report being processed or has it been implemented or will it be published? I mean, just give us a sense, whatever you can share about on the fiscal side and especially relating to that committee report.
In fact, the chairman of the committee is Sri N.K. Singh is very much here. Now, the committee report we received about 10 days before the budget presentation, and the major recommendations of the committee have been factored into the budget of 2017-18, a fact which the budget speech itself brings out very clearly. The committee has recommended 3% fiscal deficit for next 3 years, so we have remained within that. Next year we are at 3.2% of GDP as fiscal deficit, with a clear commitment to move to 3% in the following year. Now the report, the other aspects of the committee's report, because the committee has done a they have done extensive consultations, and there are there are several important suggestions. So they are we are examining them internally. And at the appropriate time, we will be undertaking stakeholder consultation also, and it will be implemented. The committee has broadly said that the fiscal deficit roadmap will have the debt to GDP as its principal anchor. In fact, that is the term which we have used in the speech of the, which has been used by the finance minister in his budget speech. So we are targeting a debt to GDP of 60% of the general government by 2023. And to attain that debt to GDP, we need a particular fiscal deficit roadmap. So that is the kind of overall approach which the committee has recommended, and this year's budget is following the same direction. Stakeholder consultation will be done at the appropriate time in a matter of maybe in the next few weeks or so.
Thank you very much. Let me turn to the audience for questions. And Lisa Robbins had a question for Mr. Shaktikanta Das. We need a mic here, right in front. And then I will go to other people.
I asked this question at lunch, and he said he would answer it now. I think I know the answer, but the 2,000 rupee note, but demonetization has been heralded as a big success, but some of us still wonder why large denominated notes were reintroduced, and how that will help safeguard against some of the things that demonetization was trying to control.
Yeah, as I was mentioning to you a little earlier, this, I have dealt with this question during the month of November and December, when the entire window for receiving the old 500 and 2,000 rupee notes, when that window was open. Now, we had to ensure a fast remonetization. Nearly 86% of the currency, which were, of the total currency in circulation, 86% was in the form of 500 and 1,000 rupee notes, the old 500 and 1,000 rupee notes. So when you are taking that much of currency out of circulation, you need to remonetize, you need to put back as much currency in value terms as possible. Government decided to take several measures to do the process faster. The size of the notes were slightly reduced in line with the international, dimensions of the length and breadth of the notes. So by reducing the size of the notes, the printing capacity went up by 20%, by about 20%. So in the same amount, in the same length of time, and with the same, quantum of paper, we were in a position to manufacture, our currency printing presses were able to manufacture 20% more number of notes. So that adds to greater value being remonetized. Now, 2,000 rupee notes were also introduced in the same background to remonetize, to do a faster remonetization. In one big sheet of currency paper, if we are printing, let us say, 30 or 40 currency notes of 1,000 rupees or 30 or 40 currency notes of 2,000 rupees. Naturally, in value terms, the 2,000 rupees is more. So therefore, it was to ensure that we do faster remonetization. That was the principal objective. The third point I want to mention is that greater focus is now being given. You have asked the question that accumulation of high value currency notes. Let me mention that the approach which is now being followed is that greater emphasis will be given on manufacture and supply of 500 rupees notes and other lower denomination notes. So you will have more of 500 rupee notes which will be circulating. So therefore, the kind of apprehension which is expressed that 2,000 rupees, you know, it will again lead to accumulation, that should not happen.
Claude Smarja.
Thank you. Mr. Minister, over the last 15 years, the states in India have been competing, I would say quite fiercely, to attract foreign investment. And in fact, this government has invited them to compete even more. I remember 15 months ago, I was chairing a session at the India-Korea First Business Summit, and one chief minister in the panel I was chairing said, whatever my colleagues from other states might have mentioned to you, I will double the advantages that they are ready to offer to you. Now, of course, we have this element that CLYDE has mentioned, that these kind of incentives to FDI might come under scrutiny. And they might come under scrutiny not only from the US, but when I look at the trends in the EU, I think we might see exactly the same tendency to start questioning the policy of trying to attract more FDI through advantages. To what extent will India, and I guess China, will be ready to respond to these kind of pressures by sticking to their ground and continuing to use whatever assets they have to get the FDI that they need?
No, you are absolutely right. I think you have raised a very important point. Let me mention that mere incentives are not enough to attract an investment to a particular location. And as far as I know, the incentives which various states are giving today to attract investment, it is available to both FDI as well as to domestic investment, depending on the quantum of investment or depending on the sector in which investment is made. So with regard to incentives, therefore, the state policies do not differentiate between FDI and domestic investment. That's number one. And number two is that incentives by themselves cannot ensure that a project necessarily comes there, because incentives would be available for a limited period of time. Let's say for 10 years or for 15 years. And if it's an FDI which is being made, let's say in the manufacturing sector, I think investors typically look at a longer time horizon. I can tell you out of personal experience, I mean, I have dealt with similar situations, having been in the state and having dealt with, having been secretary industries in the state also, and trying to attract investments from other states. Now, a state like Tamil Nadu, for example, at that time, this is about, I'm narrating what happened about maybe about 10-15 years ago. Now, when investors assess a particular location, they look at incentives, they're very important, but they also look about other aspects of the ease of operating there, the availability of technically qualified manpower, which is very important, the proximity to ports, to international airports, the availability of social infrastructure like educational institutions, healthcare facilities. So a lot of other things are taken into account and weightage is given. I remember a specific case where a landlocked state, little away from the coast, was giving a much higher incentive, and it looked so attractive that any investor would have gone there. But Tamil Nadu had the advantage, I mean the geographical advantage of being right on the coast, and the port was there, the international port was there, and availability of technically qualified manpower has been a strong point of that state, as also several other states like Maharashtra or many other states also have excellent availability of manpower, or nearer in the national capital region also, and several other places. So when you give weightage, when you do a valuation and do a long-term mapping, let's say for 30 years, and do a sort of cost benefit, then incentives do play a role, but they have only a limited role. And so therefore, it's not just incentives which will enable states to attract investment. The states will have to offer an environment which is enabling. There has to be technically qualified manpower. Landlocked states also naturally need to have greater logistics and access facilities, and precisely to get over that problem, the Government of India has launched, the dedicated freight corridor projects. The Eastern Corridor and the Western Corridor, they are under implementation now. The Western Corridor is being done with the Japanese, the JICA assistance. And precisely for the same reason also, there is a huge amount of investment which is today taking place in the highways sector. The inland waterways segment also the government is giving emphasis. So therefore, incentives will play a role, but other factors will also are perhaps equally, and sometimes they are more important. I entirely agree that there should not be competition alone. There could be at times competition between states in giving incentives, but that by itself will not be able to attract investments, because there are a lot of other factors which will ultimately go into decision making.
We'll take one last very brief question, please, okay, because we have run out of time.
Thank you, Tarun. My name is Nalin Kohli. My question is for AKAHOSHI-san. You mentioned about certain complementarity between Japan and India on software. You are strong in hardware, we are strong in software. But if you see the trade statistics, 70% of India's software exports is to North America, 20% to Europe, and very little with Japan. So I would, although I totally agree with you that there is a strategic fit between the two, I would like to know from you your comments as to how this can be accelerated. One issue is language, but then things like embedded software, the language is not that important. So I would be keen to know from you how this can be accelerated.
Thank you very much for your questions. And to be honest, in addition to the language issues, I don't have kind of various answer at this moment. But let me put in this way. The collaboration between Indian companies and Japanese companies wouldn't just go through trade, export from India or something like that. But rather collaboration between companies or form of BPOs, or as I explained in the morning sessions, now we are about to launch the fast track or Japanese green card system for highly skilled professionals. And we expect a lot of IT experts from India will be visiting Japan, taking advantage of this new system. So my answer is that there would be various ways to expand our collaborations other than trade. So we like to study and think about what would be the best way to promote such collaboration. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any brief concluding 30 seconds, Clyde, and then Mr. Das to have the last word? No? Mr. Das. Last comments.
I think so far as FDI is concerned, today the overall scenario is very attractive. There are still certain areas where there are challenges. It's a continuous process. We are trying to improve the environment. One, you mentioned about
post FIPB, the process should be simpler and much, much easier. So we are working on that. And so far as investment climate is concerned, I think today we want to become more and more competitive. And to attract our FDI also, we need to work more. And we are working more and giving emphasis on ease of doing business, on improving the ease of doing business. And hopefully in terms of improving the ranking, we should be the measures which have been taken by bringing in the insolvency and bankruptcy code and the various changes with which the states have also undertaken with regard to giving approvals for, giving building and other approvals. A lot of improvement has taken place, but it's a continuous process. So therefore, the emphasis will continue on bringing about policy changes, reforms, improving the ease of doing business, building up skills, and to ensure that India remains and becomes more attractive for foreign direct investors.
Thank you very much. I think that's a great note to end on. At the end of the day, I think all foreign investors also want to see that there is a steady hand at the wheel driving the car. And I think in Mr. Shaktikanta Das, you will agree with me that we have a very, very steady hand in India managing the foreign direct investment wheel. So please join me in thanking the panel and particularly our keynote speaker, Mr. Das.